is happening is that the response to the crisis has been to basically unleash the floodgates of public funds, right? And this is done in a number of different ways, providing credit to banks, opening up all kinds of, liquidity windows for the financial sector. Fiscal stimulus has been a huge sort of dimension of the response to the crisis in the US, in Germany, in the UK, in China, basically every G20 country that I can think of has introduced some kind of package of fiscal stimulus. Right? Now, at one level, some people say, well, this is fine. It needed to be done. We needed to somehow have the government step in where the private sector had withdrawn, totally intimidated by the lack of credit and by the crisis itself. So I'm not necessarily criticizing this, but of course the downside of it is that public debt levels have risen dramatically. I mean, the amount of red ink that is going out of government vaults is just enough to drown half of the world's population. And the problem with this, of course, is that this is going to impose constraints on government policy. The more money you spend now, and the higher your levels of public debt, the more constrained you will be in the future to spend on education, to spend on public health, to spend on infrastructure, on all these things that ultimately, have a lot to do with human prosperity. Not only that, but you're going to have less resources to deal with the next crisis. In fact, what has allowed us to be so proactive in terms of fiscal stimulus this time around is the fact that public debt levels, certainly in the United States, were not that high. And so there was a cushion that could be relied upon, right? But by 2014, according to the IMF, I think their forecasts are actually conservative, public debt in the advanced economies, will have risen to well over 110% of GDP. Now, this is huge. I mean, these are the levels that Italy we used to associate with. Italy has had debt levels in excess of 100% of GDP for the last 20 years, but Italy is Italy, right? And so to say that the world is moving in the direction of Italy is to make a fairly dramatic statement. And I really worry about these things. So that's one dimension. Second element is that at the moment there are sort of very unfavorable demographic trends which are underway in a lot of the advanced economies. You basically have aging populations, you have declining fertility, you have more and more people retiring, less and less people working proportionally, and so this is going to put a lot of pressure on pension systems. And in fact, you already have many countries that have huge unfunded liabilities, for pensions, for the equivalent of Medicare and Medicaid and so on and so forth. In fact, governments are having a bit of a tough time at the moment. There's a kind of a difficult balancing act. On the one hand, they have to stimulate. The problem is that if you stimulate a little too much and you accumulate your debt levels a little bit too much, then of course you run the risk of eventually not being credible to the markets. And this can have fairly dramatic implications. It could lead to a very sharp drop of the dollar, for instance, and this will have other repercussions. So it's a fairly difficult situation, and I'm not sure that we're quite getting the balance right. One way, or one consideration, is basically to argue as follows: if we're going to be spending a great deal of money to stimulate, then why are we not very careful in how we spend this money and where we spend it? And so many economists, and I certainly include myself among them, are saying that, well, maybe governments should take advantage of this opportunity, and since they have to spend anyway, then maybe they should spend in improving a country's infrastructure, for instance, or doing spending in environmental protection and conservation. I think that this is a wonderful time to introduce carbon taxes. I know that this is not a very popular idea in the United States, but a few other countries are doing it. The Swedes have done it, the Norwegians have done it, I think. In any case, it is an opportunity, a historic opportunity that we have, to move to a system where we basically account more appropriately for the terrible effects of global warming and the use that we're making of these non-renewable resources. I wanted to say a little bit on a couple of other issues, but maybe I will leave that for the question and answer period. We have